Today we have a Toyota Rav4 EV battery. It's a 41.8 kilowatt battery made by Tesla, and we're going to be doing a teardown video exposing the internal organs, so to speak. So this mounts up under the car. We have the Tesla emblem and stickers here, and we'll see what's inside. So here we have part of the battery taken apart already. Here's the high voltage disconnect. We've unmounted it so that it's going to stay with the battery, not with the lid. Under here we have the master BMS. It's got the connection coming here to go to the actual vehicle, which we've disconnected once before. So we have all the internal circuitry here, most of what connects to the actual outside vehicle. We have the main BMS connections coming in here that go down to the rest of the battery pack and communicate with all the other BMSs. And here is the current sensor under here. So just the kind of little parts and pieces of the battery. And the last bit was this here. This is the moisture absorbing section of it. In case the battery gets punctured and water gets in, these beads will absorb the moisture and get whatever they can. There's also a sensor here that most likely notifies the vehicle that there's a moisture problem and sets an error. So obviously there's a lot of those bolts, and we'll be getting them out here. So we just got the lid, all the screws on the lid unscrewed. Just wanted to go over with the external features before we continue inside. They have these rails that hold down everything where the bolts go through, just for even pressure. These guys I just unscrewed. Mount the battery to the vehicle in the back, and you have these along here that actually bolt up to the vehicle, and that's on both sides. And we have more here and there. We also have the coolant line here and another one here, and that I just blew those out before the start of the video. And the actual high voltage connections are hidden underneath here. So I'm going to try to get that for you guys here in a second. Here's the fuse and the high voltage contacts up there, and I'll try to get another view of that later on. So here we go with the removing the lid. Oh no. Oh no. Alright, so we unscrewed all the bolts and we've just pried it up, and we're getting ready to open it up. Oh wow, there's water in here. Oh wow, look at that. Oh. Oh boy. Well, that's not a good sight. Looks like water got in this battery. I guess we'll have to see the extent of the damage as I take it apart. Well, the basics are 4 smaller modules, and then if I remember correctly, there's 6 of these larger modules. And we'll continue tearing it down because we really have no choice. And we'll see how bad the water damage really is. So you have the BMS boards under here, and they're daisy chained. And that was the connection that we were seeing go up. And there's one on the smaller ones, and there's 2 on the bigger ones. And essentially, one big one is 2 smaller ones put together. So we have the bus bar going along the entire battery pack in various places, and there's water damage, it looks like everywhere. So we'll see how this one turns out, if there's any use from it or not. We also got the coolant lines right here, which we blew out earlier. And there's 2 on each module, obviously an inlet and an outlet. So I wonder what could have been leaking. So obviously we now know there's water damage in here. I read the voltage of this module, and it was at 6 volts total, and it's supposed to be around 24 in that range. So far this is the one that's affected the most. Obviously we can't really get into the rest of them just yet, but the voltages of these smaller ones were at 18 volts each, so that's looking promising. But once we get them apart, we'll check the contacts, see if there's any corrosion like that other module, and see what goes on from there. The only point of entry that I can see was what I showed earlier. As you can see, you can kind of see through there. We think that's where the water might have gotten in. Whoever we purchased this from might have left it outside in the rain or something. So we'll be figuring that out. Other than that, I don't see any other points of entry. There was that dent on the lid that most of you have probably seen. However, it's not a puncture. So we'll go ahead and continue the tear down. We'll be more careful now that we know there's water in there. We're kind of letting it dry out. We're going to leave it open for a little while, and we'll continue the tear down just to see what the rest of it looks like and see if any of this is salvageable. So stay tuned. So we have the battery out here in the sun just to give it a minute to evaporate the water, and we'll just recontinue tomorrow. Of course I'll be putting this in before I leave, but just giving you guys an update as how it's going, and hopefully we'll see what we can salvage from this pack. It'd be interesting. So here we are after it's been outside. There's still a little bit of water in there, but I'm going to leave it in overnight, and I'm going to put a fan on it, and we will see what happens in the morning. So here we are the next day. The water has disappeared. I had the fan running all night, and looks like all the moisture is gone. I'm going to go ahead and continue with the teardown, and towards the end I will assess how much of the modules are still usable, how much of them are complete total losses, and if there's any individual cells we can salvage from any of them. And we'll see how that goes. So like I've mentioned in my other videos, always safest to disconnect the bus bars first. That way you have a less chance of getting electrocuted by accident. And again, one point of contact at all times, just to be safe. continuing on with the bus bars, we have these jumped in between each other, as well as from here to the really corroded one, and from here over to this one. So those are the ones we'll do next. So I have unscrewed most of the bus bars from this battery. These two are left because they go to the modules underneath here, can't get to them. And the other one that I left is here, and it goes to the bottom module as well, I can't get to it. So I'm actually going to leave it screwed on this end just so there's no bus bars hanging around. I'll go ahead and start removing all the small side components, and then remove those 4 smaller modules on top. So here we have the modules out, and even after being outside and with the fan on, there's still water underneath each module. Not so much on the very first one, but the 4 after all had a good amount of water underneath it. So we'll see how that affects the actual modules, and again we'll see what kind of damage there is from it essentially being flooded. That's not a little amount of water, that's a lot of water. So I've taken the covers off and just to do a visual inspection, and I've also measured the voltage of each module. So the total voltage comes out to 18.83 for this one, 18.95 for this one, 18.85 and 18.89. So between the 4, that's about a 0.12 volts difference, this one being the lowest and this one being the highest. Now this one actually, this one and this one look the best. Those two have the more corroded of these 4 on this side anyways. So I'll go ahead and show you guys some of the corrosion, and we'll see what the bottom side looks like in just a minute. We'll cut this part out, of course, and then let's see. So here's some of the corrosion on this module. It's not too bad. It looks more like the aluminum itself is corroding, not the actual cells. However, that doesn't explain the voltage drop. This one cell right there is corroded though, so we'll see. And then there's a couple of cells here that are welded. No, sorry, not welded, that are rusted. And they're rusted actually right on the weld little fuse wire. So one of the things, other things I wanted to point out is are the markings right there. So you have a little red square as well as a green line through it. And you notice this one doesn't have any of those. This one has 2, and this one has a lot more than 2. So what that actually means is that it didn't pass the quality control, and if you look carefully you can actually see that there was one wire there prior that they've removed. So there's an additional weld spot in there, and it didn't pass quality control, so they've marked it, redone it, and then rechecked it. So the green would be good to go, or the red would be, you know, revisit. And actually a while ago I've seen one with a purple mark, meaning it's failed the second time around and they needed to come back and get it again. So again, a little bit of corrosion here, more on the aluminum bus bar itself, not the actual cells. This one again, not too bad either, relatively good compared to what the big one we saw. And then here is what I was talking about earlier with this module. And you can actually see the voltage tap actually got some corrosion too. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is put those covers back on, flip them over and remove the bottom covers, and we'll see how it looks like on the bottom side. So here we have those same modules in the same positions, just flipped upside down. And these are the bottoms when they were in the vehicle. So these were what was whenever I lifted off the modules and there was water underneath. This is the side that had the contact with that. And this side is much better than the top side, and probably has something to do with the water being on top as it condenses, not going all the way through the pack. One thing I do want to point out is there are several cells that are a little bit rusted. Those two, and that one has a little bit. There's one more here. There's one right there. One's pretty bad. This one looks like it's alright. except for the voltage tab being corroded. And this one looks alright, except 2 more cells that are rusted. So each one of these subpacks has something wrong with it, corrosion wise. So we'll have to see, either I can offer them at a discounted rate for people to disassemble them for individual cells, or I'll do it myself. It's just a matter of how much time I have and what I end up doing. So I'll go ahead and get started on the bigger packs, and we'll see what kind of damage is in there. So here we have 3 of the bigger blocks, and I've taken the top covers off once again. They're all just a little bit corroded. You can see over here again, it's mostly the aluminum on top, not the actual cells. This middle one is relatively clean except towards the end, and this one is the worst of the 3. Now this particular module was the one that, the very first one, the closest one to the what we think is the point of entry, which makes sense because after measuring the voltages, that first one is only 15.6 volts. This second one is 31.2, and this last one is 42.3 volts. So this one has 2 blocks that are more than 6 volts. I believe it's these two were, because I can't read each cell individually, I have to flip it over. These 2 totaled to be 6 volts, so it means each block, if even, is 3 volts. And then the rest of these are essentially zeroed out. We have corrosion all along this side here, and here, and then more here. Again, corrosion and rust. This block here, we have 8 blocks that are 7 volts, and 2 blocks that are, again, less than 1 volt. 2 blocks that are 1 volt, and 2 other blocks that are 1.3 volts. Which means most of this still has good cells in it. They're just going to have to be removed and, again, used for individual projects rather than the whole module. This last one, at 42.3 volts, it has 10 good blocks and 2 bad ones. So same thing, we can more than likely extract the good blocks and the good cells, and use them for other projects or sell them individually. And again, I was considering selling this as a unit for somebody who wants to do it on their own. It's very possible. I've done it before. So that's the first 3. I'm going to go ahead and take apart or get the undersides looked at, and then we'll get the next 3 out. So here are the undersides of those same modules. Again, this one is being the closest one to the hole. Lots of rust right in here. Most likely just sitting from there in the water. A lot of these cells already here are rusted as well. But still not a whole lot of good in here. There's only 2 good blocks in this one. Here we have 8 good blocks. And same, it's not good, not terrible. This is the first time I see green squares and orange near the cells, so I don't know what that means. Hopefully we'll figure it out soon. And here's that last one with 10 good blocks, and these are the ones that are bad. You can see it's corroded pretty bad in the corner there. So I'll go ahead and get those 3 out, the last 3, and we'll see how those look. So here are the last 3 big ones. This whole block, this is the one that was on the very top that we were looking at from the very beginning, when it was still in the pack. And again, lots of corrosion right here. And the whole pack is at 5.8 volts. And looking through them, there's none that are reverse polarity, which would mean that there might, if there were any reverse polarity, it would mean that there might be some good ones, but all of them were below 1 volt. So that makes a total of 5 volts. So there's 0 good ones in this pack. So this one's gonna have to be recycled completely. This one has 6 good ones. It is at 22.4 volts. Some rust right in here, this whole line. Again, 6 good modules. Rather paralleled cell blocks, 6 good ones. And then again, we'll just have to see the underside to see how good the rest of them are. This is the only sub pack that has the entire pack is good. So all the voltages are even and checked out. All 12 blocks are good. Each block is 7.69 volts. Brings the whole total to 46.1 volts. So far this is the only one that doesn't look like it has any corrosion, just a little bit here in the corners, and the only one of the big ones that has all good blocks. And again, remember, the small ones all had good voltage blocks, but there was voltage deviation in between each block, so there might be some that are not usable because they'll be corroded badly. So let's go ahead and flip these over and see what the bottoms look like. So here are those same 3 packs, right upside down. This is the one with all bad ones, and you can see it's corroded pretty heavily. Quite a bit of it throughout the pack. Mostly over here in the front. Again, lots of rust right there. This middle one with the 10 good blocks actually has a corrosion bridge built in, I guess. So again, you know, most of these are good in this one, but not all of them. I'm sorry, this one didn't have 10, this one had 6 good ones. And this is the one with all good ones, and you can see most of it's relatively good. However, towards the end here, there's a little bit of corrosion right there. And again, mostly on the aluminum plate, not really on the cell, except right there. There is one rusted cell there. Other than that, this one's in pretty good shape. So here we have each of the sub packs side by side, the big one compared to the smaller one. And earlier in the video I mentioned that the smaller one was half the size of the bigger one. That turns out to be untrue. So this is 5 blocks in series. This is 12 blocks in series. So it's a little bit smaller than half the size. So this one actually has 240 cells in this smaller version, and there is 576 cells in the bigger version. So with 4 of these small packs and 6 of the big packs, that brings the total to 4,416 cells in the entire battery pack itself. So this one was the one that measured 18.95 volts each total. That brings it to about 3.8 volts per cell, which is just about right. 3.7 is the nominal voltage. And then this big one, this is the one that has all of them that are good. Same thing, total was 50.4 volts. I'm sorry, the total was 46.1 volts. Brings it about to 3.8 volts each cell, or each block. The 50.4 volts would be if it was fully charged. So it's not fully charged, neither of these are fully charged. The one difference that I wanted to mention was the BMSs. Now, it's going to be kind of hard to see, I'd imagine. But let me do this instead. So I pulled off the BMS from the module that had all bad cells, and naturally it's corroded. Here's the underside. Again, a little bit of corrosion here and there. We have the balance resistors right there. There are 5 of them, 5 rows rather. I'm sorry, this is the 6, this has 6 rows because this came from the bigger pack, and there's 12 blocks total, so this has 6 rows of balanced resistors and transistors. Now the interesting thing is that the smaller pack has 5 rows of balanced resistors, and there's actually 1 row of missing resistors right here. So there's 1 row that's missing everything because, again, there is 1 less cell per BMS, seeing how this one has 2 BMS packs. So again, you have the wires coming in for the balancing and the voltage measurements, and you have 1 temperature sensor per BMS. It looks like they're, for the smaller Tesla pack, there's actually 2 temperature sensors. There's 4 wires coming in right there. So that's kind of, the BMS board is this identical. The only difference being there's 2 temperature sensors and only 5 rows of balancing resistors, compared to 1 temperature sensor and 6 rows of balancing resistors for the other sub-packs. That's pretty much the difference in between the BMSs, and again, they're tied in series, so each one communicates with the next one, and they all get tied to the master, which tells all of them what to do. So this concludes our teardown. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and we'll try to get back to them as quickly as they can. I would say this one's going to go up on eBay, again, selling the modules for other uses, but we'll have to figure out what we do with the damaged batteries first. And again, the one with 2 modules, most likely we're going to tear it down because there's more to recycle, and we have a recycler that can take those type of cells, whereas the ones that are either more complete or complete, those will probably end up on eBay. And again, we'll just double check the corrosion, double check each individual cell, just to verify that they're in good condition to resell. The other thing I would want to do is a capacity check, just to make sure that there isn't anything actually wrong with any of the cells, specifically the 18-volt blocks, just to make sure that there isn't anything that can figure out the reason why the voltage dropped, 0.12 volts. It could be just a slow discharge, but it could actually affect the cells. One of the questions that I'm going to assume is going to be asked is, why don't I just charge them back up? There's a lot of videos on YouTube that I saw of people recharging Tesla packs and whatnot. And the thing to remember, that those packs didn't necessarily die completely, they just went below the recommended voltage in the vehicle, which would probably be around 3.1 or even 2.8 volts, which isn't good for the cell, which is why the vehicle stopped. The problem with this is that these cells, again, they're almost down to 0. They're in the millivolts range, and you can't necessarily revive lithium-ion batteries. Once they're gone, they're gone. Now you can definitely charge them up and get voltage and get capacity out of them, but from what I've read online, it definitely messes with the internal chemistries of the cells, and they're actually no longer usable. It changes the chemistry inside just a little bit, and enough to where it's no longer safe to use. So it's more of not wanting to get anybody in any kind of trouble, not causing any damage to anyone or anything, and that'd be the reason why we're recycling them. If it were nickel metal, obviously we would probably try to revive them, but from our experience, flooded nickel metal cells are very similar. They don't really come back to 100% life. So that's just kind of one of the questions I anticipate. If there's any other ones, I'll do my best to answer. Thank you for watching.